gigantic. There have been, by the way, that swamp is bigger than any one of those yellow states. It's the same size as any of the red ones. A swamp as big as Florida. The Congo government says the swamp is 80% unexplored and they own it. Imagine an area the size of Florida, 80% unexplored. There have been reports of dinosaurs still alive in that swamp today, right now. We'll get into that in the next class. Dinosaurs still alive. Now, I don't want you to get excited and think you need to be careful when you leave this building because there might be a dinosaur out there. Well, there are quite a few in our yard, but they're all fake. I'll just tell you right now, okay? So we're going to cover next week dinosaurs that are still alive. That's been a fascinating study of mine for years called cryptozoology. We'll get into that next week. Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us for our class. And you should have finished your quiz by now from the last time. Each session you should take the quiz from the week before and then start in again. Now this session we're going to talk about dinosaurs that are still alive. This is my normally seminar part 3B. And I'm going to try to cover a lot of ground tonight instead of chasing too many rabbits because I have spent 20 years studying this topic of dinosaurs that are still alive. I suspect I've read 300 books on this topic. I've read every one I can find at all of the major libraries I've gone to research this. If you go to the library, if it's on the Dewey system, you go to 001.9 and you'll find books on what's called cryptozoology. Cryptozoology, be a good quiz question there, Becky, is the study of hidden animals. Crypto means hidden. Zoology is study of animals. So the study of hidden animals, or animals that are very rarely seen, would be cryptozoology. The man who made up this term, cryptozoology, is Bernard Heuvelmans, who is a French scientist, and he has been a long-time president of the Cryptozoology Society. They study lots of things besides just Loch Ness Monster type things. They would also study Bigfoot, not too much in UFOs, but mostly animals that are still alive. And so there have been, according to Bernard Heuvelmans, 20,000 reported sightings of dinosaurs in this century. Just in the last 100 years, there have been 20,000 people that claim they've seen a live dinosaur. Now, there's no question some of them are frauds, you know, mistaken identity, etc., etc. But let's just talk about this. Is it possible that some dinosaurs could still be alive? What I point out in my seminar is that I think we've got overwhelming evidence that dinosaurs have always lived with man. They're called dragons through most of history. And there are certainly a lot of artifacts found, human and dinosaur artifacts together, human and dinosaur footprints together, but none of that is necessary if dinosaurs are still alive. And I think there's quite a bit of evidence that some are still around. We're going to try to cover that as much as possible in one class and then go on into lies in the textbooks for our next one. But so I'm going to have to just cut it off in the middle and say, okay, research on your own. If you want to read some books, we have a half a dozen books in our catalog that deal with this topic. One that I wrote with William Gibbons called Claws, Jaws, and Dinosaurs would be just a cheap $5 book you could get and covers a lot of information on dinosaurs still living. Most of the authors on cryptozoology are evolutionists. And it's really funny to read what they say. They will do all this interesting research on dinosaurs are still living, and they go through all these sightings and stories, and then they say, wow, it's amazing. Some survived for 70 million years. So they come to the wrong conclusion after all of that. The right conclusion is, no, the world is not 70 million years old. God made it 6,000 years ago. There was a canopy above the atmosphere when God first made it, increased air pressure. Dinosaurs lived with man during this time. We covered in the last few classes about the Ica stones. Who remembers how many Ica stones have been found? Over 50,000, right. 50,000 of these stones found in Ica, Peru, 56,000 more found in Mexico, and they have humans and dinosaurs carved on them together. And here the textbooks are teaching the kids that dinosaurs lived millions of years ago, and yet we have art, we have artifacts, we have evidence that man and dinosaurs have lived together. I think probably there's a bigger picture we need to look at here. Satan hates humanity. He wants to send people to hell, and he wants his one world government, new world order. In order to accomplish that, he has to have people believing in evolution. That's his theme. It's what he started off tricking Eve with. He said, you can be like God if you do what I say. And the whole idea that man can somehow be God started, of course, with Satan in the Garden of Eden. And he's used that same lie all through history. And why let up? It's worked great. You know, and it's still going on here toward the end of time, teaching everybody that man can be like God. So dinosaurs are one of his favorite tools to use because he can use dinosaurs and teach 4-year-olds about evolution. Kids that can't even read yet. Get a bunch of 4-year-olds together and hold up some dinosaurs and ask them the question, when did dinosaurs live? Instantly they will shout out, millions of years ago. And they don't even know what millions is. But they've already been brainwashed because of the TV, because of the books like this one. I can read about dinosaurs. A book for little kids. First sentence says, millions of years ago. Same thing in Ukraine. They teach this over there using dinosaurs. Millions of years ago. Every country I've gone to, I see the same thing in the kids' books. They use dinosaurs to teach them evolution. Here's a Dr. Seuss book. Millions of years before you were born. Down in the bottom right-hand corner. Well, now just hold on a minute. Is the Earth millions of years old? Well, of course we know it's not. But all the books on dinosaurs, nearly all of them that I see, say millions of years ago dinosaurs roamed the Earth. And it's really tragic, I think, that we have allowed this to happen in the last 150 years. What happened? In 1841, when they made up the word dinosaur, many people at that time were teaching the Earth is millions of years old, and it's the same, several things happened simultaneously. The invention of the geologic column, which we'll get into on seminar part 4, the idea that the layers of Earth are different age. Darwin's theory, 1859, dinosaurs being discovered in the early 1800s, and people not knowing where to put them. Here's these massive reptiles are being found, the bones of them, and the average Christian or average layman didn't know how to put them in history. And so it was Satan's golden opportunity to come in and say, they lived millions of years ago, and Christians, instead of fighting it, swallowed it and accepted it. And there are some Christians today that accept it and teach the same thing. And they try to make dinosaurs millions of years ago fit into the Bible, and it just doesn't fit. They try to, with the gap theory and all that stuff we went through before. Here we come to Job chapter 40. The Bible says this animal, behemoth, lieth under the shady trees in the covert of the reed and fens. Fens is an Old English word that means the swamp. Behemoth lives in the swamp. Well, the largest swamp in the world today is in the central part of Africa. It's called the Likwala Swamp. So that'd be a good quiz question. What's the largest swamp in the world? The Likwala Swamp is over 55,000 square miles. That makes it larger than the entire state of Arkansas. Arkansas is 53,000 square miles. The state of Florida is 55,000 square miles. So is Illinois and Iowa. Each of those 3 states are about the same size. That swamp is as big as any one of those states. It's huge. Most Americans don't understand the size of Africa, so here's a map showing Africa and America together. It is just simply gigantic. That swamp is bigger than any one of those yellow states on our map here, the same size as the 3 red ones. In 1885, Belgium, right next to France, Belgium came down and colonized the Congo. In the late 1800s, many advanced countries, for lack of a better word, were colonizing other countries. That's a nice way of saying they were hiring their people for a nickel a day to get all their gold and minerals and diamonds. They were robbing these countries of all their valuables and enslaving them, basically. But they called it colonization. Anyway, the Belgians ruled this country for about 75 years. And if some of the older folks will remember, when you're in school, they taught you about the Belgian Congo. This was the name of this country, Belgian Congo, until 1960, when the communists went in there and liberated them. You know how the communists liberate a country. You know how they liberated Ukraine, killed 10 million people and said, okay, you're free now. But the communists liberated them, and now it's called People's Republic of Congo. But for 75 years, it was called the Belgian Congo. Explorers from Belgium and other countries went into that swamp. After all, they'd taken over this territory, let's see what we have here. Looking for gold and diamonds or whatever. In 1910, this article appeared in the New York Herald. Is a brontosaurus roaming Africa's wilds? Now, at this time, the brontosaurus had just been discovered before that. There were two groups, a guy named Cope, C-O-P-E, and a guy named Marsh, M-A-R-S-H. They were two fossil hunters that were in competition with each other. And they had crews that would go out all over scouring the West trying to find dinosaur bones and dig them out and bring them back and put them together in museums. They each worked for different museums. I think one was for Harvard and one was for American Museum in New York or something like that. Anyway, they had this tremendous competition to go out and look for these dinosaur bones to put them in the museums. They got in a hurry to put one together, put together this big dinosaur they found, but it didn't have a head. So some guy got a head from 4.5 miles away, brought it in, they stuck it on the dinosaur and called it a brontosaurus. Most of the dinosaur names come from Latin words. Brontosaurus is thunder lizard from Latin. And they said he was so big when he walked the ground would shake, you know. They called him the thunder lizard, brontosaurus. Many years later they discovered it was the wrong head. There never was a brontosaurus. They had the body of a diplodocus and the head of an apatosaurus. It's not a big mistake. I mean, it's sort of like putting together bones of a dog and you don't have a head. Say you put together the bones of a Chihuahua and you find you don't have a head, so you put the head on there from a Great Dane. Well, they're both dogs, but there's no such thing as a Great Chihuahua. So there's no such thing as a brontosaurus. It was a mix-up, but it's okay to use the term. If you watch Fred Flintstone, you know, he drives a brontosaurus and they eat bronto burgers, and that's all from the brontosaurus. So in 1910, they did not know about the mistake yet. It had just been put together, I think, in 1890 or something like that, and it was several years before they discovered it was the wrong head. So this article came out and said, is a brontosaurus roaming Africa's wilds? This is in the New York newspaper, because so many people had gone in there and come out saying, you know, we saw a dinosaur in there, still alive. Now, I think the Lord always has His witness and His testimony in things. And here we have people, scientists and teachers all over the world teaching, you know, dinosaurs lived millions of years ago in the early 1900s. And persistently these rumors start popping up and dinosaurs still living. Just to give, you know, the Christians some hope that, hey, maybe the Bible is indeed the Word of God and it's right. 1948, this article appeared in the Saturday Evening Post. Now, the Saturday Evening Post was a major magazine in the early 40s and late 40s, sort of like Time magazine or National Geographic or something like that. This article is three pages about dinosaurs still living. It goes through people who've gone in there and say, look, I saw one. Gives their testimonies in this article, January 3rd edition of Saturday Evening Post back from 1948. By the way, if anybody can get me an original copy of this, what I have, I found one at a library where they actually had the original magazine, 1948 Saturday Evening Post. And I photocopied the pages out of there, and it was a very lousy photocopy, so all I have is a lousy copy of the original. I would like to find somebody who has an original and buy it off them. So if you come across one, let me know. A South African big game hunter named Mr. Gobbler, good name for a game hunter, I suppose, returned from a trip to Angola and announced to the Cape Town newspaper that the Cape Argus was the name of the paper, that there was an animal of large dimensions, the description of which could only fit a dinosaur, dwelling in the Dololo swamps and known to the natives as the Chippewa. It has the head and tail of a lizard. Ivan Sanderson, who wrote the article that we mentioned earlier, There Could Be Dinosaurs, from the Saturday Evening Post, this quote is from that article. Ivan Sanderson was quite an explorer and collector of sightings like this and stories. And he really has some amazing reports he's done on this. And again, we could spend the rest of my lifetime talking about reports of dinosaurs still living. So I want you to research it for yourself if you want. Go to 001.9, or if it's the Library of Congress system, it's QL 89, like Queen and then Larry 89, and you will find books on this topic. Okay. People in Central African Republic call it Nguri. That's their name for it. Different missionaries that I meet all over the world tell me, oh yeah, we've got one of those in our country. The natives talk about it. But they all, of course, have a different name for it. In some parts of Africa, in the swamp, as you travel around, they will speak a different language. Some people call these creatures Chippewa. Some call it Yalama. They have different regional names for it, depending on their vocabulary. Well, Dr. Roy Mackle from the University of Chicago decided to go to the swamp. He had been involved in studying cryptozoology for many years, and he'd read all these stories of dinosaurs still living, And he was a microbiology professor at the University of Chicago. He said, well, a good scientist, and you hear something, you check it out. So, thankfully he was honest enough to say, okay, I don't think it's true, but let's go check it out. Now you have to understand, if you got a bunch of scientists together and said, let's go to the North Pole and look for Santa Claus, what's going on in their mind? Why spend all that money? We know it can't be true. It's a waste of money. That's exactly the way many scientists feel when you say, let's go to Africa and look for living dinosaurs. Because in their mind, it's already been settled. We know dinosaurs lived millions of years ago. Why waste all that money and go look for them? It can't be true. So their teaching, their philosophy of evolution hinders them even thinking down this track that there could be some still alive because of what they've been taught. Okay, so anyway, Roy Mackal did go with James Powell, I believe his name was, a crocodile expert, and they went to the Lakwala Swamp. This is from the book Time, Life, Mysterious Creatures, part of the Time, Life series, one of the big books they have, showing a picture of them tromping through the swamp. They said it's the most miserable swamp in the world. Mosquitoes landed on them at the rate of 1,000 per hour the entire time they're there. Bloodthirsty mosquitoes, snakes, bugs. You need to understand also this is a communist country now. So the communists have gone back in there to these swampy areas and told the villagers, boy, if you ever see a white man, he's probably a communist, he's probably a spy against the communists, go ahead and kill him. Very unsafe place to go. Mark Miller went there and wrote a neat article about how he just about was killed by the pygmies because they thought he was some kind of spy. But in the book The Living Dinosaur, written by Roy Mackal, after going into the swamp, he tells about the Mahamba, the giant crocodile that the natives report that lives in the swamp that gets to 50 feet long. One group of scientists in I don't remember the date now, 1984 I believe, claims that they saw a Mahamba, a 50-foot crocodile. This room is 34 feet long, so that's a big crocodile. The natives talk about the animal called Mokele Mbembe, which is their pronunciation of the creature. Mokele Mbembe means, I believe it means stopper of rivers. On page 225 of Mackal's book, he shows this sketch that he would show to the natives, and they would say, oh yeah, that's Mokele Mbembe. He lives out in the swamp. Mackal tells in his book how he tried, as a scientist, to make sure he wasn't leading the natives to answer a question. He would go to some villages, and he would just mention the name. He would say, what is Mokele Mbembe? And they would draw a sketch on the ground with a stick, and they'd draw a picture of a dinosaur with a long neck and a long tail. Other villages, he would show them a picture and say, what is this? And they would say, oh, that's Mokele Mbembe. Now, it's a very superstitious region over there, and a friend of mine who was there Gene Thomas, was there for 42 years. I just talked to him 3 days ago. He said, Brother Hovind, you have to understand, the people here are very superstitious, and some of them believe that if you even mention the name Mokele Mbembe, you will die. So if a person goes into this area and says, what about Mokele Mbembe? They may say, oh, never heard of it, because they're afraid of dying for saying its name or for talking about it, because they're very superstitious people. But Mackal went there and spent a lot of money on 2 expeditions. He says the animals live underwater most of the time. They're mostly active at night, which makes them even harder to see, obviously. Plus, when you figure the natives over there are real superstitious and scared to go out at night, they're not likely to be seen very often. Example, did you know panthers are still alive in Florida? Panthers, like the big cat. How many have ever seen one alive in the wild? I've lived here 11 years. I've seen one, and it was dead on the highway. And yet we've got a population of how many millions here in Florida? And I would say the vast majority have never seen a live panther. But they're living right here. I was surprised to find out after living here in this house quite a while that there's an owl that lives in that tree right behind here. I've only seen it twice in the 11 years we've lived here. A huge owl. Well, it's nocturnal, okay? It's out at night. So the creatures in the swamp in Africa are apparently about 20 feet long, mostly neck and tail. The body's about the size of a hippopotamus. The natives showed Dr. Mackal the favorite plant. They said it's the malombo plant, and there's Dr. Mackal holding one. He says it has a fruit on it that's sort of like an apple, but harder than an apple, and Mokele Mbembe just loves these things. So they will even climb up out of the water into the jungle to get these plants and eat them, typically again at night or very, very early in the morning. Some natives claim they see one when they go out real early to go fishing. They will see one of these animals, and it'll duck under the water and make big waves and even sometimes knock their canoe over just because of the waves of this giant creature submerging. Dr. Mackle here is shown outlined with a footprint. This is again from Time, Life, Mysterious Creatures, page 94. There's Mackle's phone number there. He lives in California, and he's got a Chicago phone number. He's retired now from University of Chicago. But he's examining a footprint that the natives showed him where the animal came up out of the water and walked across the land to go after some more of these plants. They said to Mackle, if you want to find a Mokele Mbembe, find a place where there's lots of these plants and no hippopotamus. Because they don't like hippopotamus. They drive them out of their part of the river. That's his story. You can read it for yourself in the book. Gene Thomas, a missionary friend of mine, was there for 42 years. He's now retired back in Ohio. There's his name, address, phone number. You can call him up if you don't believe me. He said the natives over there wouldn't talk about it much, but occasionally they would. And there were two pygmies that he met that had claimed to they killed and ate a Mokele Mbembe, and he calculated it would have been roughly about 1959. They don't use the same calendar we use, but he said probably about the late 50s they claimed they killed one. He said now in the high humidity over here in Africa and the high temperature, meat spoils very quickly. He said the natives told him that everybody that ate the meat either got sick or died. It could be there's some poison in the meat. It could be, a new animal, they didn't know how to properly clean it to get rid of the poison glands or whatever. Like if you kill and eat a carp, you have to cut out the mud strip or else it tastes horrible, destroys the meat. If you don't know how to clean it properly, you can mess it up. Same thing with deer, if you shoot a deer, you don't know how to properly clean it, you can spoil the meat. He said, I'm not sure what happened, but they may have gotten sick and died. He said it could be this animal was so huge they didn't want to waste the meat and they tried to keep it too long with no refrigeration. Bottom line is, it may just be a story, but the natives said, we killed it and everybody that ate it either got sick or died. And obviously they did not die, they must have just got sick. But the natives said that these animals will come up out of the river if you surprise them in their part of the river, and they will hit your canoe with your tail and break your canoe to slivers. Let me back up one picture. He told me that they put stakes across the river one time to trap one of these animals because it kept bothering the fishing. The natives were going into this one lake to go fishing, and these Mokele Mbembes kept coming in there, eating the fish and scaring the fish off. So they pounded stakes in the river, one of the rivers leading to this lake, to try to stop the creature, and when it got caught tangled up in the stakes, they speared it to death. Mackle said in his book that he could still see the stakes there in the river when he went, 20 years later. So the story, he thinks, is true. Marcelina Agnagna is a biologist from the Congo. He's a communist teacher there, teaches in the communist school. He says he saw one in 1983, and he drew a picture of the back. When they asked him why he didn't get a picture, Marcelina said, well, I had a camera, and I took pictures, but the film was all ruined from the high humidity. Okay, a reasonable story, because it is extremely high humidity. You carry a camera through the jungle sometime and see how well it functions after 2 or 3 weeks of tromping through the jungle. It's pretty tough to keep your equipment. Just survival is a full-time job. Keeping your equipment working is another whole set of problems. Anyway, this is a fascinating article by Dr. Mark Miller, who went to the Congo swamp with a crew, and I'd recommend you get this Far Out magazine. Now these guys are not necessarily Christians, they're just researchers, explorers, who go do research on dinosaurs still living, all kinds of amazing stuff in this Far Out magazine, Far Out Adventures. Their phone number right there, or their website, azstarnet.com. Miller said they were captured by the pygmies and they were going to kill them. And so they got these guys were all in this hut, like 5 or 6 of them. They got all the patches and badges and medals they could find and put them all on this one guy's shirt. And he just marched out and said, I'm a important government representative. They had Boy Scout medallions, security guard patches. And of course, the natives don't know what it is. Made the guy look important. And he went out and said, I demand that you release us right away. Well, the natives didn't know what to do, so they released them all. That's the story he tells in there of how they got out of it. But they just were nearly killed by these pygmies. A group from Los Angeles went there. Herman Regusters and his wife Kia are mentioned in this article, dinosaur-like beast photographed during African jungle expedition. Kia and Herman described the creature. They said they saw it and photographed it, but again, the pictures didn't come out very well. High humidity destroyed the film. He said the creature was dark brown in color. The skin appeared slick and smooth. Now that's interesting. If the skin is slick and smooth, it's probably an amphibian as opposed to a reptile which has scales. Unless it's just wet or muddy, and then you can't see the scale pattern. For instance, many snakes look slick and smooth, but they have scales. So it could be he didn't get a good enough view. He said had a long neck and a small head. Herman saw it, Kia, his wife, saw it, and on several occasions, and they heard it making a tremendous roar. Now, as far as I know, the only recording available, and I have it in our archives here somewhere, is about a 4 or 5 minute recording that they made of a tape recorder of this creature roaring at night. And it was dark, they couldn't get video footage, but they said it would go roar and then a slapping sound. Strangest thing they'd ever heard. And when you listen to the tape, you'll say, man, that sounds strange. They checked the voice print of this, whatever it was, because they just turned the tape recorder on and let it record while this creature is making its roaring sound. They couldn't even see it. They checked it with all sorts of other animals. You know, what's close to this anyway? What makes this sound? They found it was reasonably close voice print to, I think, a gecko lizard or some lizard, that when it roars, the skin on its throat puffs out, and then the skin slaps back. It's the closest they could find, so they guess it might be some kind of giant reptile making this noise. But Herman and his wife Kia said they heard the creature. Many other members of the expedition, including government officials from the Republic of Congo, saw it and heard it. Here's a story from the Boston Herald newspaper about how that there's an expedition going into the swamp again. There have probably been 30 expeditions into that swamp in the last 20 years trying to photograph or capture one of these creatures. Chuck Holcomb from North Alabama has gotten permission to go in there with a blimp, inflatable dirigible, and fly over the swamp with cameras and infrared instruments to try to photograph this creature. He's got a couple of millionaires backing him up on this expedition. Chuck Holcomb's a good friend of mine. He's the one that built the huge cave, which you inflate, for kids to get in, and it's a dinosaur cave, and he's got it on the side, travels around and uses it as a ministry. But he's going over there, supposed to be, I think, fall 2000 or spring 2001, and he's going to actually go into the swamp and try to photograph this. He's concerned, and I mentioned this to him. I said, Chuck, I don't know if infrared will do any good if it's a reptile. They don't have any body heat. They're the same temperature as their environment. So infrared may not show up. This article appeared in London, United Kingdom. There's a website there, or email if you want to get a hold of them. Hunters launch a trek for a living dinosaur. You can get on cryptozoology.st if you want more on that. The natives over there claim that these animals live in caves. They're very rarely seen. They come out at night, and they eat plants for a while, and then they move on somewhere else. They're migratory. So it's not a simple matter of, hey, let's go take a picture and go home. It's just not quite like that. William Gibbons was Mr. Scotland, one of the bodybuilders, like me. And he is a good friend of mine from Canada. He's been over there 3 times to the Congo swamp, and he and I wrote this book together. You can get a hold of him. His website or his email is congo@ionsis.com, and talk to William about his expeditions. He's also been to several other places on cryptozoology adventures. For instance, there is some pretty good evidence that the dodo bird is not extinct. The last known dodo bird was like 300 years ago. And they've got it stuffed and mounted someplace in a museum. But there are some islands out between Africa and India where they say there are probably some dodo birds still alive. So he's doing research on that type of thing. I was about ready to go on TV one time in Canada on the 100 Huntley Street Club program, and I'm sitting there, and they're putting makeup on and all this stuff for TV, and I'm sitting there with a missionary who I had never met before. His name was Cal Bombay, and he does a regular story on this 100 Huntley Street every week, or every day, whatever they broadcast. And I was telling Cal about dinosaurs still living, and I had Roy Mackel's book there. And I handed it to him. He just was thumbing through it, and he stopped on this page right here, page 256, and said, my wife and I saw one of those. He said, I was missionary in Kenya, Africa for 15 years. He said, we're driving down this dry, dusty road, very arid region, lots of small brush everywhere, and we saw this giant creature. He said, I would guess it was about 15 or 18 feet long, like a monitor lizard. He said it was stopped in the middle of the road, like it was sunning itself, trying to warm up. You know, lizards have to lay in the sun to warm themselves up. He said, it looked like that picture you have there, but the plates on the back were bigger. He said, we shut the car off, and my wife and I watched it for 10 or 15 minutes. He said, finally it got up and just walked off into the brush, disappeared. I videotaped an interview with Cal Bombay, and it's on the end of my video number 3. You can see the interview with me talking to Cal about the creature that he saw. He, describes it for himself. Down in South America, one of the largest jungle swamp areas in the world is down here, called the Amazon jungle. I flew over the Amazon when I came back from preaching in Brazil and was just amazed at the size of that thing. That jungle is huge. It goes forever, it seems like. But in 1907, Colonel Fawcett from the British Army was down there. He was a member of the Royal Engineers. And he had a reputation of being a no-nonsense kind of guy, meticulous recorder of facts. They sent him down with a crew to mark the boundary between Brazil and Peru. Fawcett reported in the Beni swamps that he saw an animal he believed to be Diplodocus, which would be the Brontosaurus, okay? Only a little smaller version. The Diplodocus story is confirmed by many of the tribes east of the Ucayali River. This is from the book, The Rivers Ran East. You can check it out for yourself back in 1953. Colonel Fawcett's son drew a picture of the footprints that they saw. He saw one of these animals in the swamp, and they described it as having a long neck sticking its head up way into the trees, and a large body and a long tail. Typical dinosaur-like sighting, and there are thousands of these available that you can read for yourself. Bolivian saurian, this is from 1883, Scientific American. Now understand, in the late 1800s, evolution was not as firmly entrenched as it is today in our system. Any articles like this would never make it into Scientific American today, because anything that might harm the evolution theory is going to be carefully kept out by the review committee or whatever. But here's what the article says. The Brazilian minister at La Paz, Bolivia, had remitted to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Rio photographs of drawings of an extraordinary saurian, that's dinosaur, killed on the Beni after receiving 36 balls. They shot it 36 times. By order of the President of Bolivia, the dried body, which had been preserved in Asuncion, was sent to La Paz. It is 12 meters long, 39 feet, from snout to point of the tail, which latter is flattened. Besides the anterior head, it has 4 meters behind 2 small but completely formed heads. Nobody knows what this means here. Rising from the back. All 3 have much resemblance to the head of a dog. The legs are short and end in formidable claws. Who knows what they mean by the extra heads, unless it means fins on the back or spines or bumps, who knows. Or deformity, we don't know. The legs, the belly, and lower part of the throat appear definitely defended by a kind of scale armor. And all the back is protected by still thicker and double, whatever that word is, cuirass, starting from behind the ears of the anterior head and continuing to the tail. The neck is long and the belly large and almost dragging on the ground. Professor Gilvetti, who examined the beast, thinks it is not a monster but a member of a rare or almost lost species, as the Indians in some parts of Bolivia use small earthen vases of identical shape and probably copied from nature. William Corliss has written in many, many books where he gathers information from old encyclopedias and old magazines about sightings of strange things like this. And he's done great work. You might want to get a hold of William Corliss's book or any of his series of books. It's listed in my seminar notebook in the blue pages under Source Book Project. Here's a picture of a 35-foot snake that just swallowed a native. They killed the snake and put it in the truck. You know, snakes have a jaw that they can open up. The jaw comes apart so they can swallow something bigger than their body. Snakes are found with pigs inside and deer inside where they swallow the whole thing. And a large snake like that might only have to eat once a year. Guinness Book of World Records has 32 feet as the longest snake proven.